Hey, I'm Dave Delgado, and I'm going to talk to you about why learning goals and success criteria are something that you really want to incorporate into your teaching practice.
My story with learning goals, I guess, starts the very first staff meeting of September 2015 of that school year. And I met the school's new instructional coach, Miran Kristovic. And he said, "Oh, Dave, I've seen some of the work that you've been doing since you've returned to the classroom from being like, a technical consultant yourself. And I see you kids are doing things like, with 3D printing and design and 3D scanning. It seems really interesting. I'm wondering, will you actually invite me into your classroom itself to kind of see what you guys are doing? And actually let me see one of your assessments that you're using in your classroom." So I said, yeah, sure. And I gave him one. I showed him an assessment that I'd created where they had to create a 3D designed and scanned avatar for themselves to use on social media, let's say on something like Facebook. So it was a lesson that incorporated numeracy and critical thinking and digital citizenship. I was kind of proud of it. And he said, "Oh, Dave, that's really good work. That's really interesting. But where are your learning goals?" And I was, I guess, a little bit taken aback. And he said, "Well, you know what? Don't worry. I'll come to your classroom. You're going to love it. And we're going to work on learning goals." So I thought about it and I thought about it. And I was extremely close to sending him one of those emails. One of those emails when you have someone that you meet from the board who's a consultant and you kind of don't really want to see them again. So you want to kind of in a very nice, polite way, tell them to leave and never be seen again. So I was very close to doing that and sending that email for three specific reasons. I guess it felt kind of funny to me. It felt almost bureaucratic to have someone come into my classroom. It felt a little bit big brotherish, right? It feels weird coming in and evaluating you. So I guess the very first reason was that I didn't really want to feel like I was being watched or judged. And reason number two is that by now I had been teaching for 15 years. And I know there are a ton of things that I know that I'm supposed to be doing in the classroom, and I'm trying my best to do them. But sometimes you think when another kind of initiative, quote unquote, is launched by your board, maybe if I wait it out, this too will pass. And then the last thing is that I thought, aren't there really better uses of my time? I want to be doing things that are really avant-garde and interesting. I'd rather spend my time researching and working on that because it isn't easy. So I was impossibly close to sending that email when I recalled something that I had read in the weeks previous in Time magazine. It was about a study out of Johns Hopkins University, and it said that 10% of all U.S. hospital operations result in infections. And a researcher by the name of Dr. Peter Provost was tasked to come up with a solution. The solution was that each doctor in his hospital had a checklist of tasks to perform before a surgery could take place. They physically had this checklist and they physically had to check them off. And these were all basic things. So these were things like washing your hands with soap or making sure that they put sterile drapes over the entire patient. And that's when I realized that written at the top was essentially the goal of the checklist, and below the goal were essentially the success criteria. The interesting thing with this system, which was highly successful, was the doctor reaction. Now I'm going to put up on the left-hand side of the screen what the doctor reaction was as assessed through a bunch of surveys that came out after the fact. I found it very interesting to see how they seemed to match up with my own feelings of being evaluated or having to work on learning goals and success criteria in my own classroom. Another interesting fact to come out of the Johns Hopkins study is that 98% of the doctors surveyed would want to have surgical checklists to be used if they themselves had to go under the knife. In terms of raw numbers, mortality was cut by more than half after surgical checklists were implemented. Now, for learning goals and applying this to education, I could show you a lot of studies that have similarly impressive numbers, and one in particular is Hattie's work in 2009, which illustrated that having assessment literate students is the most effective instructional strategy, even higher than things like formative evaluation or metacognitive strategies. But really, for me, that wasn't the most important factor. The most important factor is how it worked in my classroom. And I found that it was essentially a mirror. I put learning goals up on the wall, and I realized that the lesson that I was teaching wasn't meeting them, and that made me redesign my lesson to be something better. If learning goals act as a mirror for your own teaching practice, they can act as a window for your students to understand your assessment. Taking the time to write good learning goals and success criteria is time you can save when you go to create a rubric or checkbook for your assessments, and you also make them more transparent to your students. Writing learning goals and success criteria someplace visible in your classroom is transformative, but technology makes it easy for you to push them right onto your student devices, so they themselves can interact with them. Great solutions exist today for Google-based platforms like Google Classroom, Office 365 based products like Microsoft Classroom or OneNote Classroom, and ministry-supported platforms like Brightspace D2L. What you and your students are doing with your platform is always more important than which platform you are using. So as my final challenge to you is to take the time to post learning goals and success criteria someplace in your room 3 times this week and see if they make a difference in your teaching practice.